Hi, I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. As I've talked about, I'm focused a lot on global literature, a lot about literature in translation. And one of the things that I have noticed is that a lot of books that are translated very often fall into the high arts quality. They're very often literary genre, literary, high literary. And very often genre books specifically aren't necessarily given, translations. And I thought that was sad, not necessarily because I read a lot of genre literature myself. I have a project where I'm trying to read more genre literature, but mostly I do read literary books. But I do think that we lose something when translated literature is the same as difficult literature, high arts. It's kind of skews the way that we communicate on cross-cultural barriers. So this year I want to do a kind of project where every other month I am focusing on a genre and I'm presenting 2 books within that genre just to highlight how we can view genre literature as something that is worthy of translating. So now we are going to do thrillers, which is the genre that I've picked for January and February. And I've picked 2 books for them. Now, a little caveat. I am doing a project where I'm looking into mystery/thriller genre, similar to my reading romance genre, trying to sort of figuring out what is mystery/thriller and why are these 2 very often put together. So that is why the first 2 genres are thrillers, and next one, which is going to be in April, we have mystery. And these are the books we're going to read for mystery. So, first of all, let me introduce you to the 2 books I have read for the thriller genre. The first book I have read is Karin Fossum, I Can See in the Dark. And this is both a very good and yet a very bad example of Nordic noir. So it's kind of cheating starting with a Nordic noir book, because Nordic noir, as sort of a subcategory of thrillers, is already highly talked about internationally. Again, it's its own subgenre, Nordic noir. But at the same time, I thought that this was a good place to start because it's so common, because people already read this, because they are so highly translated. Now, this book is, again, it's a bit different, yet very, very similar. So when it comes to Nordic noir, what it mostly talks about that is different from, for example, the British whodunit series, is that it focuses on a crime having happened, but rather than focusing on who has done it and figuring out who has done it or how catch them, so how to catch them, it focuses a lot more about the psychology of crime. And there is a reason why probably this has been so important to the development of Nordic literature. If you've ever met someone from a Nordic country, you've probably noticed that we can be perceived as rather cold. And one of my favorite travel descriptions, is someone who traveled to Norway in the late 1800s and described Norwegians as being of oil, created by oil. And I think one of the things that they meant with that is that Norwegians are emotionally slow. Compared to, for example, the trope of the hot-headed person from Southern Europe, for example, Italian or Spanish. We don't really share a lot of our emotions. We don't really let people in very easily. And therefore, there is sort of this exterior that a lot of us have that is sort of a big part of the social cultural aspect of a lot of the Nordic countries, where you can't really tell on the outside what is happening on the inside. We have television channels and programs that show us building fires because that's how we can talk about our emotions, about how it is important to stack highly and use a lot of fluid, all about the emotions. And of course, then, the focus on the psychology of crime has become quite an intriguing idea in comparison to the very typically cold exterior that we usually have, that we don't really know what's happening on the inside of our neighbor, our classmates, our colleagues. I mean, any of them could be a killer. Have you thought about that? Any of us could have some weird dungeon where they're doing weird stuff. And that is what, in part, Nordic noir plays on. Now, when I'm saying that this book is somewhat different, what I mean is that very often Nordic noir will follow a police detective in the same way that you do with whodunit. But not in this one. Karin Fossum is a very famous author when it comes to Nordic noir, but I Can See in the Dark is different in the sense that we are put in the head of a murderer. So we are in the head of Rektor. He works at an old folks' home. He gives palliative care. And a huge part of this book, especially in the beginning, is about him explaining how he loves tormenting the people that he has in his care, and how glorious he feels watching them be hurt by the way that he can pick up their hair or hide their medicine. And no one really cares because he is a man who is willing to work with the elderly. So he is, of course, touted as a pillar of proper actions because he is a man in a female-dominated culture, and he does a work as a nurse that a lot of nurses don't want to do, which is palliative care towards the elderly. And then we realize that Richter has, in fact, murdered people. And then Richter is, put in prison because people are accusing him of a murder. Except the murder that he is accused of having done is not the murder that he has actually done. Which is such a brilliant plot point. It was such a wonderful plot. The idea that you have a murderer who is arrested for the wrong murder. Because, of course, then the entire book ends up with being this drawn between being innocent of what he is being accused of doing, at the same time trying to not let them figure out of all the bad things that he has actually done. So it's a very interesting play on the psychology of bad people accused of the wrong bad thing. And I thought it was a brilliant take on that. The second book that I have read is Chaos in Kinshasa. It's by Baruti and Thierry Bellefroid. Baruti is from the DRC and is a very famous comic book author. And this book is inspired by the true fight between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali, which is the Rumble in the Jungle, which happened in Zaire. And then, no, Zaire, is it Zaire? Yeah, Zaire, which is, which is a different name for Kinshasa. Because, of course, George Foreman and Muhammad Ali are such famous boxers at the time, they are getting a lot of press and a lot of people who want to travel them, including Ernest, who is then traveling to Kinshasa because he was won a ticket. And sort of the thriller aspect of this is that, in addition to everything that, the backdrop of everything of this is what is happening in Angola, where there are political coups, and they are using the DRC as a place of dealing and getting things. It's a political thriller. And there is a lot of sort of almost like a very typical spy thriller, except sort of with the backdrop of the Rumble in the Jungle, which is almost insignificant, except the fact that everyone is then using this fight as a way of meeting and connecting with one another. The artist or the art is very similar to or reminiscent to this genre of a spy thriller set in the, I want to say 70s. When was the Rumble in the Jungle? I think it was 70s. Yeah, 74. What I was a bit confused of, or what I was wondering was, what is Ernest doing here? Why is this petty criminal from the US such a focal point for everything that is happening? With all of the spies and everyone that is trying to get information from everyone. I don't really mind the sort of the Rumble in the Jungle backdrop. I was just a bit confused about that. But at the same time, it can also be quite understanding of why this was such a huge part of it. Because, well, the US is kind of influential of everything that is happening. The US has a finger in with everything that is going on, and therefore it's not really surprising that even when the US isn't doing anything, they're not politically involved with the things that are going on, they still manage to be involved with the things that are going on. What I really liked about this is that, number one, I had no idea that the Rumble in the Jungle was actually put in an African country. I assumed that this was a fight that had happened in the US. And also the fact that I had no idea about any of the political spy stuff that was going on, and the history of Angola and everything that was going on there. And of course, how neighboring countries very often is drawn into debates and discussions happening because, well, people and movement and money has a tendency to not understand barriers the same way that politics are very focused on barriers. So there is a very interesting aspect of the pure spy story, the way that you have sort of the innocent bystander, the woman who is drawn into sex work, the way the soldiers and the spies are talking or not talking with one another. And then you, of course, have the debate of DRC as a country in relation to the global world, considering that they are hosting this very famous fight. But also, the relationship and the ideas in regard to African Americans' relationship to Africa. A huge part of what Ernest is dealing with is that when he's traveling to Kinshasa, he is not recognized as African. He is American, even if he is black. So he is sort of dealing with the fact that he is both welcome yet not welcomed. He's home yet not home. And that can be quite an interesting topic to read and understand, considering everything that is going on with, well, African Americans specifically. So that was the two different books that were thrillers that have been translated into English. Highly recommend both of them if you are interested in those different genres. And please let me know what you think about, thrillers. What kind of thrillers in translation have you read? And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.